So our first meeting was diagnosis. That's the medical aspect. And we went looking at patient 0 to try and understand what exactly the problem is. Because I don't know if you've ever spent a lot of time fixing a problem that wasn't the problem. I've done that on my car a few times. It's not very satisfying. It's not very helpful. If you don't have a good diagnosis, you kind of don't know where you're going. And I proposed the conclusion. I proposed the diagnosis. What is it, the official term? A differential diagnosis? Is that? I never have quite figured out the significance of that one. But anyhow, does that just mean you're differentiating from all other possible conditions? Is that the differential part?
Options that could be causing this.
Okay. Anyhow, so I ended up with a classification for the disease. Does anybody remember what that was? Sin is a deficiency disease. That's kind of nice. Really? Because deficiency diseases are they tend to have a fairly clear treatment approach. You know, if you've got scurvy, eat some limes, right? You know? Just to give you a little confidence in the medical establishment, over about 200 years, an estimated 2 to 3 million sailors died of scurvy. There was a British surgeon by the name of, I think it was Harvey Lind, and he figured out that he could cure and prevent scurvy with citrus fruit. And he wrote it all up and he submitted it to the British Admiralty. And 40 years later, the year after he died, they started giving the sailors limes. How many sailors died in that 40-year period? I haven't got a clue. But anyhow, that's the way it goes sometimes. We know what to do, but we don't do it. So, if the cause of the disease is a deficiency, the treatment is supplementation. And I left you with this list of accusations. This is my list. You know, somebody might develop a little bit different, and that's fine. But I don't think there's anything of any great significance. I think if you did the same sort of homework and came up with the same sort of a list, I think we could harmonize them very easily just in a matter of semantics or however you might have chosen to express the thought. But I left you with a question last night. If you were God and were confronted with this list of accusations, knowing that 1/3 of the angels had bought into this list, what would you do? What's your plan of treatment now?
Show them where they're wrong.
Show them where they're wrong. There you go. Now, there is if you've ever dabbled with the field of formal logic, it's kind of fun. And they have what they call fallacies. You can find a lot of examples of this running around because most of the world is built on them, it seems to me. But one of the fallacies, and they tended, I don't know who named these things, but some of them, they tended to come up with kind of almost folksy type of names for the different fallacies. A lot of them are Latin, but some of them are just kind of folksy. And one of them is known as poisoning the well. Anybody know what poisoning the well is?
Yeah.
So I like to illustrate this one. I am candidate A, running for mayor of was it Walnutville, or what's the name of the town? Marshall. Okay, Walnut Creek, something. Anyhow, I don't care. Washington D.C. Yeah, pick a town, any town. I'm running for mayor, and I'm candidate A, and over here I'm candidate B. And so we have one of those town hall meetings, right, where all the nice people come out to hear the two guys talk back and forth and decide who they want to vote for. And so it's very structured. Candidate A gets his 10 minutes, and then candidate B gets his 15 minutes, and candidate A gets a 5-minute rebuttal, and this guy gets a 5-minute rebuttal, and you know, whatever the rules are. So candidate A, he gets to talk first, and he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, it speaks so well of your civic interest that you came to the meeting tonight. Congratulations, I'm so glad you're here. Flattery, flattery, flattery." And then he says, "Before we really get started, there's one thing that's very important you must understand. My opponent is a notorious liar. You can't believe anything he says." And then he goes ahead and he takes his rest of his time. Now, candidate B gets to speak. What's the first thing he wants to say? Flattery, flattery. Probably. He's a disciplined politician, so always start with flattery. But anyhow, okay. But beyond that, he wants to say, "I am not a liar." And candidate A breaks the rules and says, because he's not supposed to speak now, but he breaks the rules and says, "He just lied." Accusation number 9, Lucifer said, "You can't believe anything God says." What can you do about it when people don't know if they can believe what you say? The well has been poisoned, and words are of a decidedly limited value. We tend to think that God has all sorts of options for anything. And we're encouraged to think that. You know, there's a great quotation, I'm sure you've heard. The Lord has 1,000 ways to provide our need, of which we know nothing. So now, God's facing a challenge. 1,000? 10,000? 100,000 ways to solve this problem? Try one. Only one. The only plan that could be devised to save the human race was that which called for the incarnation, humiliation, and crucifixion of the Son of God, the majesty of heaven. Now, I should put a caveat on this. This is to save the human race, but we're going to find that there's a very close connection between saving the human race and solving the accusations against the government of heaven. Because remember, accusation number 3 involves the human race. So we're integrally tied into this situation. Okay. The only plan. There was no other way by which man could be brought into harmony with his unchangeable law save by the death of Christ. It's interesting. She's describing the goal there is to bring men into harmony. That's worth noting in passing. This was the only way by which the law could be maintained and pronounced holy, just, and good, by which sin could appear exceedingly sinful, and the honor and majesty of divine authority be maintained. Now notice in that statement, it doesn't say a thing about saving human beings. The only plan that could save human beings happened to be identical to the only plan that could save God's government. That's interesting. How shall the universe know that Lucifer is not a safe and just leader? To their eyes, he appears right. Stop and think about that for a moment. Lucifer looked good, and he had just been kicked out of heaven. Would that raise a question in your mind? They, the rest of the universe, cannot see as God sees beneath the outward covering. They cannot know as God knows. Then to work to unmask him and make plain to the angelic host that his judgment, Lucifer's judgment, is not God's judgment, that he has made a standard of his own and exposed himself to the righteous indignation of God, would create a state of things which must be avoided. What would that state of things be? It wasn't an option. God had to avoid that. But Lucifer looked good. I said last night that I think spirit prophecy has to dumb down Lucifer's arguments for us, or we'd be captivated by his arguments. You know, we are in a fairly precarious frame of mind. It's like taking a bunch of kindergarten kids and trying to coax them through a nuclear war. They're not quite prepared to understand the dynamics of it. God desired that a change take place and that the work of Satan be brought out in its genuine aspect, but the exalted angel standing next to Christ was opposed to the Son of God. The underworking was so subtle that it could not be made to appear before the heavenly host as the thing that it really was. Now last night I introduced the semi-heretical concept that there are things that God can't do. Look at that next to the bottom line there. It could not be made to appear. Satan could not be presented to the universe at once, there's the qualifier, at once in his real character. His crooked course must be allowed to continue until he should reveal himself as an accuser, a deceiver, a liar, and a murderer. God could say all that, but the universe didn't know if they could trust God's word. I think it's really fascinating. I mean, I don't remember if it shows up in here, but there is clear evidence that angels still had at least an intellectual sympathy with Lucifer's arguments until the cross. And they were welcome in heaven. It's not a bad thing to ask questions. The difference between the angels in heaven who had questions and the angels with Lucifer who had questions was the issue of who they chose to trust in the meantime. That's a pretty key difference. And it's important to remember because it turns out that righteousness is by faith. Satan had disguised himself in a cloak of falsehood, and for a time, there's the temporal qualifier, for a time, it was impossible to tear off the covering so that the hideous deformity of his character could be seen. He must be left to reveal himself in his cruel, artful, wicked works. There's nothing God could say that was going to solve this problem. And let me just, I see some picture taking going on. I will be happy to supply you with a PDF of all these quotations. So yeah, no trouble. We'll make some arrangement for that. But you're welcome to take pictures too. God's purpose is to place things upon an eternal basis of security. Time must be given to Satan to develop the principles which are the foundation of his government. The heavenly universe must see worked out the principles which Satan declared were superior to God's principles. God's order must be contrasted with Satan's order. The corrupting principles of Satan's rule must be revealed. The principles of righteousness expressed in God's law must be demonstrated as unchangeable, perfect, eternal. Now, notice those words. It's one thing to tell God what he can't do. It's another thing to tell God what he has to do. But that's pretty much the intention of must. These are things he had to do. Now I want you to consider each of the steps outlined here, because they're very instructive. They show us something. Satan's principles had to be developed. The universe had to see this all worked out. God's order must be contrasted. There must be a revelation, must be revealed. Satan's rules must be revealed. God's law must be demonstrated. In all the armory of heaven, there is a single weapon. Only one. And that's the revelation of truth. That's all God does. So he lets people see the reality of the situation. And notice that in this process, all of the, shall we say, damage done to Lucifer is self-inflicted. This is not the kind of war that we might think of with, swords and spears or hand grenades or ICBMs. There's actually a good word that's worth knowing. We may come to this later on. In Revelation 12, when it says there was war in heaven, the word war in the Greek is polemos. From that word, we get our English word polemic. Okay, so that doesn't show up in anybody's top 25 vocab list these days, but anyhow, it's still a good English word. A polemic is a virulent attack on someone else's principles of operation. Not the person. On his principles of operation. You will very occasionally hear this in politics. Almost never. Usually you get garbage. Okay? But occasionally, someone will actually get down to analyzing some sort of reality to the thing, But even if Satan discredited it himself, that didn't restore God's character. Satan's evil had to be demonstrated. God's righteousness had to be demonstrated. The unfallen worlds saw that the character of God could be vindicated only, not very many options here, only through this trial and conflict of the two forces. The attributes of God must be made to appear. Of the stability of his government, there must be no question. Again, the only weapon God uses is clarification, is education. As a teacher, I kind of like that. Education. Letting people see rather than indoctrination. Teachers like that too, but it's letting them see for themselves. That's the weapon. No verbal description could reveal God to the world. Through a life of purity, a life of perfect trust and submission to the will of God, a life of humiliation, such as even the highest seraph in heaven would have shrunk from, God himself must be revealed to humanity. No verbal description. Words would never do it. And just to, as a bit of a spoiler, jump way, way ahead on this, what do you suppose the odds are of preaching our way to the second coming? This is an imperative issue. Not just the demonstration part, but the proper demonstration part. Without the correct knowledge of God, the human family would be divested of all divine strength. Now just, as an English teacher, this is a great paragraph, okay? Because for a third grade graduate, Ellen White has a pretty good grasp of vocabulary going on here. I like this, okay? So first off, what does the word divested mean? What's that? Distribute? It's kind of removed. Yeah, sometimes it is a distribution process that removes, but yeah, it's kind of like stripped away from. It's sort of like a few years back there was a kind of a popular thing is demanding that certain organizations or whatever divest themselves of all investment in South Africa because they practiced apartheid, right? Remember that? It's been a long time. I'm sure they must have used that since, but South Africa is the one I remember. That means you got to get rid of all your South African investments. Okay, they have to be removed from your portfolio. Okay. Without the correct knowledge of God, the human family would be divested of all divine strength. Does that seem like a great idea? All divine strength. That's an issue. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but maybe you will read into it the same thing. Who knows? Where do you suppose divine strength comes from? Okay, it comes from God. It's divine, but it comes through the channel of a correct understanding of God. There is value in understanding God. Okay, second sentence. With false attributes kept before the mind as belonging to God, the human family would be the dupes of satanic lies. Stop there. How many of you know what a dupe is? Pardon? No?
Have been lied to and
Deceived.
yes.
Okay. So it comes from the idea of a counterfeit, sort of, okay? Etymologically, etymologically, not entomologically. Let's keep the insects away from the words one way or the other. But, it comes from the word duplicitous. Okay, it's related to the word duplicitous. Someone who is duplicitous has two faces. Right? Remember the Roman god January? Janus, okay? That's where we get our word January, because he looks forward to the old year, he looks backward to the last year, right? So the god Janus had two faces. Well, somebody was pretty quick to catch on to that and said, hey, if I've got two faces, I can say two things out of, I got two different mouths here, right? So to this group, I say this, but to this group, I say something quite totally different, and that came to be known as duplicitous, right? Because the Latin root dupe, it means the same as bi. Why we have to have a redundancy there, I'm not sure. We could have all ended up writing dupe cycles, but we're writing bicycles instead. Okay, but so duplicitous is saying two things to different people, and a dupe is one who believes the lie. Okay? With false attributes kept before the mind as belonging to God, the human family would be the dupes of satanic lies. Is that a good thing? Likely not. Yes. And the subjects of satanic agencies. And he could practice upon their credulity with success. What is credulity? Credulity is the tendency to regard as credible that which is not. We would probably say their gullibility. It's a close synonym. Okay? This all comes from false attributes. It's worth something to have a correct knowledge of God. It's worth a lot. To me, one of the most amazing things is that down through the last 6,000 years, been a lot of people who have not had a correct knowledge of God. Some have had a very, very partial knowledge of God, and God's found a way to save them. That's a fascinating thing. And we're going to have to deal with that later on.
That's a faith question.
It's integrally involved in that, yes. So, what's the treatment for this deficiency disease of sin? The great object that brought Christ to the earth was to reveal the Father. A correct knowledge of God. So that we wouldn't be the dupes of satanic lies and the subject of satanic agencies, and we wouldn't regard Satan with credulity. Right? Okay? It sort of makes a nice, picture. I think it's starting to make sense to me. Right? God is love. This was the great truth that Christ came to the world to reveal. The object of Christ's mission to the world was to reveal the Father. She says this so many times. It's like I just got used to reading over it. It meant nothing to me. It was obvious. It means a lot. It's the plan. In all his ministry, all his self-denial and self-sacrifice, Christ's object was to reveal God to the world. Okay, so we know he's revealing the Father, but how and why did self-denial and self-sacrifice get thrown into the same picture? Because that's the character of the Father.
To answer the accusation.
To answer the accusation, yes. The character of God is to help others. To deny self, to sacrifice whatever, in order to help others. Christ exalted the character of God, attributing to him the praise and giving to him the credit of the whole purpose of his own mission on earth. How much? To set men right through what? The revelation of God. Okay, now, right after the word earth, see that little line thing? Does anybody know what that's called? Nyeh. Do I hear?
Hyphen.
No. It's a dash. What's that? Oh, I've got a typographer in the crowd. Wonderful. It's an M dash. Do you know why it's called an M dash? It's the same width as a capital M. Have you heard this sermon before? Okay. Not just a whole lot of folks running around the street that know that, but that's good. I'm glad you do now. And everybody knows it now. It's great. Knowledge is being promulgated here. That's good. An M dash is the same width as a capital M.
Okay.
Now, in English, we have three kinds of dashes. We have the hyphen. What do we use hyphens for?
Tie words together.
Hyphenating words, yeah. Okay, yeah, hyphenating words. That's why we use hyphens, okay? Then there's one that's a little bit longer than a hyphen. Do you remember that? It's an N dash. Why is it called an N dash? It's the same width as a capital N, and it is used for... Okay, this is why repetition is good. Okay. It always replaces the word to. So if I write January dash March, January to March. If I write A dash Z, it's an N dash. It's not a hyphen. Don't do that. It's an N dash. Okay. You can actually get that with your keyboard. You know, it takes a little trick, but you can do an N dash. Okay. But this is an M dash. What are M dashes used for? To connect, to show the relationship, I would say perhaps. It's actually to set off a thought, but it's that setting off that shows the relationship to the main thought. Okay? So now, just a little more English, because this is good. It's nice for everybody to know this stuff. In English, we might have a simple sentence. Okay? We have a subject and a verb. Let's just say, I usually use a prepositional phrase, so let's just stick with the subject verb. John ran. Yep. Subject, verb. Easy, right? Everybody's with me on that one? Okay. Now, if I said, John, comma, Mark's brother, comma, ran.
Yeah.
Has the sentence changed?
No.
No.
Information.
We've got a non-restrictive clause that has been set off with the two commas.
Yes.
Okay? You always set it off. Two commas. You don't go, John, comma, Mark's brother ran. No. That's tacky. Okay? A non-restrictive clause means it's not changing the sentence. The sentence is John ran. It's just adding information. Okay. So now, if I want to do that, and this is a great thing to do because basically the reader needs information. That's why he's reading, right? So you're trying to squeeze the extra piece of information into the sentence. Okay? So you want to set that off in one way or another, and there are three different ways to do that, depending on how much interruption you want in your sentence. The easiest, the least interruption is the commas. Okay? The next level up is the M dash. And the most interruptive is parentheses. But they all serve the same function. It's just different levels of interruption. Okay? So here we've got an M dash. So this is a non-restrictive clause. It's actually an appositive clause, which is to say that it's a definition, just like John, comma, Mark's brother. What's the difference between John and Mark's brother? None, same guy. Okay? That's in a positive. John, Mark's brother, equal sign, okay? The whole purpose of his own mission on earth, M dash, to set men right through the revelation of God. What was the whole purpose of Christ? To set men right. I thought the whole purpose of Christ was to come save sinners. Well, yeah, it is. That's the set men right part. Okay? It's just that it's through the process of the revelation of God. Does that make sense? Sentence goes, or paragraph goes on. When the object of his mission was attained, what's that next thing? Which means that the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 words are what? A non-restrictive concept or element there, okay, yes. So when the object of his mission was attained, the revelation of God to the world, that's the object of the mission, right? The Son of God announced that his work was accomplished and the character of the Father was made manifest to men. What was that announcement? It is finished. Because the character of the Father is to deny self, to sacrifice for others' benefit, up to and including dying for them. That is the character of God. When Jesus came to reveal the Father, he did so with a level of precision that was necessary. Christ came to this world for no other purpose than to display the glory of God, that man might be uplifted by its restoring power. No other purpose. Which is stronger, the whole purpose or no other purpose? It's it's a little. I go back and forth between those two ways of saying it, but the point's pretty strong. I guess trying to keep this short, I cut out the. What I was talking about there is it says that he came to reveal the Father. He revealed as much of the Father as man could to tolerate without being destroyed. Basically, that's the thought. I forget the exact wording, but it looks like I don't have that here. But that was the thought. Okay. Had God the Father come to our world and dwelt among us, veiling his glory and humbling himself that humanity might look upon him, the history that we have of the life of Christ would not have been changed in unfolding its record of his own condescending grace. In every act of Jesus, in every lesson of his instruction, we are to see and hear and recognize God. In sight, in hearing, in effect, it is the voice and movements of the Father. There's no difference between John and Mark's brother. Okay? There is the difference of distinct personality between the Father and the Son, but in terms of wherever it says there, anyhow, it is the character of the Father. That's clear. Let's go on. Jesus said the same thing to Philip. He who has seen me has seen the Father. So how can you say, show us the Father? It's like, Philip, please, you got to get up to speed here. Jesus could not express in words to the understanding of man the love of the Father. He could only say, and then she quotes John 3:16, right? The most beloved, most familiar, most famous verse in the entire Bible, great verse, wouldn't do the job. Okay? Wouldn't do the job. But he did express the love of God in his actions. Actions are a revelation. Actions speak louder than words, yes. Okay. And because God is smart, we have this next fact. The Savior of the world devoted more time and labor to healing the afflicted of their maladies than to preaching. Why would you not? if I could invest my $10,000 in Wall Street, ignore the obvious idiocy of that, but anyhow, if I could invest my $10,000 in a stock that was making 0.003% interest, or a stock that was pulling in, I don't know, say 15.7% interest, where would I put my money?
15.6.
Yeah, it's called return on investment. And it works with time as well as money. And so Jesus spent most of his time healing, enacting what he wanted people to understand rather than telling them. Now, he did tell them about it. There were sermons, right? You know, Sermon on the Mount, the parables, all that, the Beatitudes, that's all good. But what strikes me as odd is how little we focus on this active function of the revelation of God. And how muddied, perhaps, our ideas of Christ's work have become in the process. We emphasize the sacrifice of the cross, which is good, but we see it 98% of the time, possibly 99%, we see it as like a payment. You know, here's X dollars. And we don't see it as an active agent in the recovery of men. Do you see the difference? You know, it's like the sinner is passive, and God is simply paying out however much it costs to get this guy out of jail. Which leads to some embarrassing questions. You know, who's he paying? Now, is he paying Satan? That seems a little warped. Yeah. Is he paying himself? That seems a little warped. You know, the answer to those questions, they're all warped. When we do consider Christ's work of revealing the Father, we seldom see it as the means, as the active agent in the salvation of sinners. It's a nice thing that he did. But it is the active agent. It's the only way to supplement faith. And we're dealing with a deficiency disease. Faith is built on an intelligent understanding of the character of God. And the only way you can build up faith is to increase the intelligent understanding of the character of God. And so, Jesus' whole purpose seems kind of logical. Okay, let's play with a little Greek here. I am not a Greek scholar. My entire Greek vocabulary is about 6 words, I think. But let's try this one on for size. That's not Greek. Jesus turned around, and when he saw her, he said, "Be of good cheer, daughter, your faith has made you well." And the woman was made well from that hour. That's a good verse. There's another one. Jesus said to him, "Go your way, your faith has made you well." And immediately received his sight and followed Jesus on the road. And one more. Jesus said to that one thankful leper who came back, right? "Arise, go your way, your faith has made you well." Now, what's interesting here is that those words, they all come from the same Greek root word. Sozo. Very good. Exactly right. Sozo is the word translated here. A little more Greek, disguised as English. This is Gabriel. "She will bring forth a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." This is Jesus. Those who sat at the table with him began to say to themselves, "Who is this who even forgives sins?" Then he said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." And this one's Paul. "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God." And those words all come from the same Greek root, which is Sozo. Same word for physical healing and spiritual salvation. Same word. That's interesting. There is a near synonym in the Greek New Testament, which I cannot pronounce. Iaomia, I think, or something like that. I don't even try to pronounce it. It's used for both physical and spiritual salvation too. It's not as common as sozo, and I can't pronounce it, so I never talk about that one. Made you well, or made well, and saved. All the same Greek word, sozo. That's important. The Holy Spirit never has and never will in the future divorce the medical missionary work from the gospel ministry. They cannot be divorced. Bound up with Jesus Christ, the ministry of the word and the healing of the sick are one. You'd almost think Ellen White was a Greek scholar. She nailed it. But we're focusing so tight now, it's time to zoom back out. Because we're dealing with the whole of the great controversy. So just so we don't lose, get lost in the woods and lose sight of the forest, notice that all of this was to deal with one major element that Christ was faced with. Christ's life of sinlessness lived on this earth in human nature is a complete refutation of Satan's charge against the character of God. That is the underlying and overarching purpose of Christ's life on earth, was to answer the accusations. Now, it's a very pleasant side effect that comes along in that it also accomplishes the salvation of human beings. But the bigger issue is God's government and the universe. And so Jesus was here to deal with that. Now, I'm going to make a fine distinction in a minute, so I want you to notice something here. A complete refutation of Satan's charge against the character of God. Remember that qualifier. So now we're back to the accusations. God said the only way to deal with these was through the process of demonstration, and Christ came to do exactly that. Fair enough. How was it working? How did things look, let's say, just after the ascension of Christ? So he'd come, he was born, he lived, ministry, death, resurrection, back to heaven. How are Satan's accusations holding up in the eyes of the universe? Okay. Well, let's look number one. Angels are holy by nature and wise enough to govern themselves, so they don't need God's law. How's that looking these days? You just crucified the innocent Son of God. Don't tell me how holy you are. Don't tell me how smart you are. That demonstration is complete. Well, no, it's not actually, but anyhow, that demonstration is sufficient. There's a distinction. Logic makes a distinction between sufficient to come to a conclusion and complete to answer every question, okay? But the demonstration was sufficient. Nobody's believing that angelic nature and wisdom by themselves are inherently holy. That one's gone. Look at number two. God was unfair when he exalted Jesus above Lucifer. Well, number one, he didn't exalt him. He always had been. But in the clarification process, was that unfair? Lucifer's argument, I'm guessing, probably went something like this. Well, yeah, Jesus, he's a great guy. He's got some good points. I've got a few good points. If somebody's going to get a promotion around here, I think it should be me. Nobody was regretting that Lucifer was not put in charge of heaven. Okay? There is a very, very clear distinction between the two individuals. I like to put it like this. Lucifer said, I know what I want, and if I have to, I will kill you to get it. It's not that I don't like you, but I have to take care of myself. God's not going to take care of me. I have to take care of myself. So if I need to, I will kill you. Nothing personal. Take no offense. Okay? In contrast, Jesus says, I know what you need. And if it's necessary, I will die so you can have it. I don't want to die. But my Father thinks it's best, and I trust His judgment. That's an important aspect. Not my will, but thine be done. Jesus didn't want to die. But He did it because He was not deficient in faith. And the Father said, this is the best thing. And so He did it. Okay, so accusations 1 and 2 are toast. What about number 3? The plan to create human beings was a big mistake. Well, after the life of Christ, we have what an engineer would call proof of concept. Because Jesus came as a human being, with a fallen nature, no less, and, he did all right. There's nothing inherently hopeless about the human nature, because it worked out okay. Now there is some, numerically, there were a lot of humans who hadn't done as well as Jesus. Okay, that's true. But we had a proof of concept. There's nothing wrong with human nature when it's functioning properly. What about number 4? God is selfish, unforgiving, and revengeful.
No.
After the cross? Like, seriously, Lucifer? Okay. 3 and 4 are down. Number 5. God's law is defective and needs to be changed. And let's put that together with 6. Nobody can keep God's law. There is one classic way to disprove an argument. And I like to always illustrate that by nobody here really knows me that well. So, just little side detail. One of my hobbies, extracurricular activities, is weightlifting. And I can actually bench press 200 kilos.
Whoa.
Okay, this is a very nice crowd. All I got was one whoa. The best response was in Romania, where I said, I do some weightlifting, and at that point somebody started laughing. Okay, so actually, full disclosure, I'm not really a big fan of weightlifting. I know next to nothing about it except that there's weights involved, okay? But if I said that I could bench press 200 kilos, and you scoffed at me, now you were very nice, but let's bring out the bench. Let's bring out the bar.
Tell me your secrets.
And there's a little phrase that I like to use right at that point. This is almost universal, slightly different pronunciation in different languages I've found, but it's virtually universal so far in the countries I've been to. And the phrase right after you do that, in English it goes, nah, 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 nah. So I think it was Romanian, it was na na na. And Spanish, well, how is it in Spanish? It's a little bit different something, but it's very similar. It's like, everybody seems to have caught on to that one, okay? Because there's nothing like proving your point by doing what they said you couldn't do. And Jesus had done it. And the law had worked well. There was nothing defective about it. And it could be kept in sinful human nature, of all things. 5 and 6 are down in flames. That's progress. That's 2/3 of Lucifer's arguments. Now, there are 3 that are still on the table. And that's why I pointed out that Christ's life was a complete refutation of Lucifer's accusations against the character of God. It's a kind of a fine distinction. But these 3 are still on the table. And so, I don't know. I say, okay, so these 3 have more to do with governmental policies, perhaps. That's maybe a distinction from the character of God. I mean, it's kind of hard to differentiate. Maybe Ellen White wasn't speaking with the utmost precision, however, whatever. You can do what you want with that one. But I'll guarantee these 3 are still on the table. And we'll see why later on. And so here's the question. What do we do now? What do we do with these? Here's the good news. Number 9 is contingent on the first 8. God has already been proven accurate on the first 6. When he's proven right on 7 and 8, number 9 just kind of evaporates.
Right.
We've got 2 things to work on. Would it make some sense to focus on those? We don't. We focus on every other interesting thing under the sun. Maybe, just maybe, we ought to pay attention to why we're fighting this war. And that's the end of this presentation.